But now I have. You are now being recorded.
There is a lot more to say about library law than we can do in 1 hour, so I'm going to hit the high points. I did include on the Moodle page a listing that Chris Ripple did a couple of years ago and has added to since of the statutes that have to do with libraries that apply directly to libraries. But today we're just going to hit the high points, and we'll see how we do getting through all this in an hour. There's a lot of information coming at you. I know. I don't expect you to memorize it, and hopefully your assignments will be such that they'll be very useful to you in the end. So we'll get started here. So the very first thing that you need to know is that public libraries in Kansas were established by law by the legislature. The first library legislation was written back in 1951. So if your library is older than 1951, it was grandfathered in at that time. And if it's been established since 1951, it's been established according to the statutes that are in the Kansas statutes annotated. So this is just a definition of what a statute is, and you can find all the statutes at the kslegislature.org, and you don't even need to go on to the rest of it because it'll say find a statute. It'll be easy to find. So you might know from all the stuff we talk about what goes on in Topeka that this is actually how a bill becomes a law. If you study the picture carefully, you will see that rarely does a law come into effect what you actually wanted or needed in the first place. This is one of my favorite. I have had this in my files since the early 70s. I'm not quite sure where I first picked it up, but I found it online yesterday because I knew that I couldn't be the only person that loved this understanding of how bills become laws. So though we might have wanted a tire swing, what we actually got was something that doesn't work at all. And that's pretty standard. And we see that every year in Topeka. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about one of the things that they passed this legislative session that we're not sure how it's going to affect us as yet. So, all of the laws pertaining to libraries are contained in Article 12 of Chapter 12. So, Chapter 12 is the laws that govern cities, municipalities, basically. And Chapter 12 is the section concerning public libraries, but not all of the laws that pertain to libraries are just in that section. They're spread throughout because there are other laws that apply even though they're not specific to libraries. They're more general, but they do apply to us as well. The 12.18 is all the definitions. So if you're wondering why we call things a municipality, it's kind of a broader term that covers either a county, a township, or a city. And the governing body is also a broader term that covers trustee or township trustees, city councils, city commissions, and all those kinds of things, county commissions. So because our cities and our townships, and I think counties are all called councils, but they're all called commissions, but we have different types of city setups in among the different cities, and so we just call it the governing body. And so again, the official head is also the broader term that could mean mayor. It could mean the township trustee. It could be the chairman of the of the county commissioners. And library, we're talking about the public library that is supported in whole or in part by tax money. And in this case, we're also going to talk about legally established libraries, so libraries that fall under the provisions in these statutes. A regional library is a library that is maintained by 2 or more counties, and the one that we have here in the North Central Kansas system is Potawatomi-Wabaunsee, and I think that there's one other regional library out in Southwest. And then there are a couple of district libraries. Is anybody, are any of our students from district libraries this year? You have some, Robin? Okay, I thought so. So we'll go over that. And library board means the board of directors or trustees of a library. So those are our basic definitions. So a municipality may establish and maintain a library. There's ways of setting that up, and it's mostly for new libraries. Is done by election, and you get on the ballot and you pass the law. So sometimes we have little libraries that have been established in communities and they've been pretty much volunteer and they haven't asked for any tax money, and then they get to a certain size and they ask. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. All depends on what they want. And so this is 12-12-20, and this is a very important statute, and it's going to come back around to us. This is how a library is established, okay? And this is also the language that says that the municipality shall fund the budget that the library board brings to it. And that is in that first paragraph. The governing body shall forthwith establish such a library and is hereby authorized and shall annually levy a tax for the maintenance of such library in such sum as the library board shall determine within the limitations fixed by law. So there are many interpretations of that clause there. It has been hotly debated. The League of Municipalities thinks that that shall does not mean must, and most of the library community thinks that shall means that they have to do it. So this debate will come back around once again in this next legislative session as we clarify something that they passed last year. So the other thing is that that once they levy a tax, and you'll notice if you look at the published budget for your city or your township, that there is a line, and it has 12-12-20 on that line that says that according to this statute, they are levying this amount of money. So that money that they levy on behalf of the library on that line must go to the library. They can't say, oh, we've had a bad year and we have a lot of potholes and we're going to take some of that money and fill the potholes. That's not allowed. And they can't put that money into the general fund in any way. It has to be maintained separately as the library fund. So we have had some issues with cities in the past where they have expropriated the money for other things, and sometimes, so it's very important that you know that it's also set in statute when those disbursements are supposed to come from the county. They come from the county to the city, and then the city passes them on to the libraries. Those dates are in the handbook, the Kansas Public Library Handbook, and I strongly suggest that you know when those dates are so that you can pay attention to whether the city is giving you the amount of money that they levied on your behalf. So this allows for 12-12-21 allows for the city to issue a bond to build or refurbish a library, and that's how I think It's one of the things that right now we're looking at some libraries that have bonds out there that they might be wanting to put under their tax lid. So we'll see what happens there. This is how boards are appointed. And depending on the type of library that you are, there are different numbers of people appointed to your board. So there are usually 7 members. There are 7 members of a city library board, and there are 5 members of a township library board. Johnson County, I believe, has 10 on its library board, and there are some other exceptions to the rules. But the thing that follows for all of them is that everybody's term begins May 1st and expires April 30th. So if you have a board member who leaves in the middle of their term, their term can be filled by someone, but that term ends whenever that original person would have ended their term. And a person can serve 2 4-year terms. I just recently, not too long ago, came across a board member who had been serving 22 years, I think it was. We figured out in the end. And she graciously agreed that it was time to step down and let somebody else take the place. And we got somebody else in there, and it all worked out. I think she thought she was going to have to carry that library for a long time, and I think everything has gone okay. But so you want to keep track of when your board members are appointed and how each one succeeds the other. And that's one of the things that I think has been very difficult for a lot of libraries to keep track of, because sometimes you get board members who just serve for a couple of months because they've got other things, or they move, or they get sick, or in some cases they pass away. And so it's really interesting to try and keep it all going. And so once a person has served on that board 2 full terms, they have to sit out at least 1 year before coming back on the board. Now, the other thing is that by virtue of their office, the mayor, the head of the municipality, so the mayor of a city or the township trustee, are also members of the library board. And they have all the rights and responsibilities of the rest of the library board members. So you want to make sure when you're sending out agendas and minutes that the mayor always gets that, and the mayor knows that they are part of the board. And no other person, the mayor can't appoint somebody else to do that job for him. It has to be the mayor. And if the mayor wants to have someone else from the city council sit in because he can't be there, that person doesn't have a vote, but the rest of the board members, would have a vote. The mayor also counts in the quorum for it. So if you have a city library board, that's 8, so you would have to have 5 there. I think I got that on a slide farther on here.
Carol, is there a similar official for district libraries?
No, there is not.
Okay. I didn't think so, but I wanted to clarify that. Would you have a couple of district libraries here?
Yeah, the board members, and we'll go over that in a bit, because those board members are elected. They are not. They don't have somebody else. So these are some kinds of points that I just made. I didn't.
However, Carol, for a township library, the township trustee is a member.
Yes, that's what I did. I said that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the township trustee, the chairman, if it's a county library, the chairman of the county commissioners, and the mayor of the city council. And then all the members who are appointed to a library board should be residents of the community, unless you have a charter ordinance that the city council passes to allow other people to serve on the library board. And I know that that has happened in a number of communities where they have members of the community who live outside the city limits, but are clearly members of that community, and they have extended it. Generally, it doesn't get more than a mile or two outside the town limits, but it's especially when a person who would like to serve on the library board lives outside of the town limits, but maybe has a business in town or works in town and has real connection to that community. So as our small communities become smaller population-wise, but maybe a little bit more spread out by reason of who's living maybe on a farm or something close by, or maybe lives on some acreage outside the city, some of the city councils have extended their borders a little bit. Okay, so there we go. So in May, right after all the new appointments have been made and all that, so the board meeting in May, the board should elect a chair, a secretary, and a treasurer, and any other officers that they want, but basically those are the three that most of them have. Some boards also elect a vice chair to stand in for the chair if the chair is gone, and the bylaws would say what the officers are. And then the board shall fix the date and place of its regular meetings. So it's expected that a board has a set time and place for their meetings. So if they generally probably meet at the library, and it could be, the third Tuesday or the second Thursday, or however they want to do it, but that those boards should be regular. Those board meetings should be regular, so that people who are interested are clear about when the board is meeting, and they shouldn't be haphazard. I know I've encountered boards that sometimes meet only quarterly. Boards should really meet monthly, and they should be as consistent as possible with the time of their meetings. So that's very important. And then if they're going to have a special meeting, although the Kansas Open Meetings Act does not require that there's notice, I think especially in smaller communities, it's very important that you give notice for the meeting, and we suggest 48 hours. And the business for the special meeting is noted. So if it's the furnace has gone out and the board needs to meet to decide on who's going to replace the furnace and how much they're going to spend and all that, then that's the only business that's transacted at that meeting. So it's important to be very clear about that. And although it's not, the written notice isn't required, it's a good idea. The other thing is that anybody who requests always to be given notice. So if the newspaper in your community always wants to know when you're having a meeting, then that is required that they receive notice in advance. Okay. So 12-1225 is the statute that I go over with the boards whenever I do an orientation. And this is all their powers and their duties as a board. And you all can read this at a later date, but they're the ones who are empowered to acquire material, to employ librarians, and to establish library policies. And so those are their jobs, and should be they shouldn't be just piled on top of the librarian. And I know that sometimes there are boards who say, well, you do the budget, and we'll just do whatever you want us to do, or you do the policies and we'll just approve whatever it is that you give us. You need to have their active involvement in the making of policies and budgets, and very importantly, plans for the future. So you want your board to be as engaged as possible in all of this, and not just say, oh, we'll just go along with everything you want us to do. That does not make for a great board. And at some point, it's hard on the librarian, even though it seems like it's easy if you have a board that's just going to rubber stamp everything, but you're just not getting the support with the tough decisions. This more of 1225, it's a very long statute. And couple of things to note in here is that it's actually the board who is required to make that annual report every year, although we know that the librarian does this one. But it's important that the board be involved in that report and knows what's going to be sent out. And this is where it talks about in J, it talks about how you control the money that comes into the library. So, and I know Laura probably went over this with you all about making sure that funds are not commingled, that tax money is held separately from donations and things like that. And it's by law that you do that. And once again, this year I had to go before to talk with the city clerk, because his county clerk had told him to put the library donations into the budget that they were submitting for approval that would go on to the state. And I had to bring this to him and say, well, technically you can't put that into that budget. So it's important that you're very clear on that. And your consultants can come out and help you if you have a city clerk that is unclear on that. 1226, the treasurer needs to be bonded, and generally speaking, it can be done fairly inexpensively if you bond the position, not the person. So I think that it's about $100, $120 a year for most of the smaller libraries. It might be more expensive for libraries that have larger budgets, but most of our smaller ones seem to be able to get by with that. The treasurer pays the bills and keeps accurate records, and generally speaking, they do this in conjunction with the librarian, the library director, because it's good to have more than one set of eyes on all of these things. Okay, 27. The library board can establish these rules and regulations. So if your board says they want to charge fines, you can charge fines, and you can extend the use and privileges to residents and non-residents of the municipality. If you are a member of one of the regional systems, which all of you are then required, that's the other set of laws, to extend services.
Carol?
Yes?
We have a question in chat. Is there any reason for the director to be bonded as well?
No, not by law. Generally speaking, if you've got it set up right, and I think Laura talked about how every check needs 2 signatures and things like that, it's just the treasurer that you bond, because the treasurer is the one that's going to have control of the bank accounts, ultimately control of the bank accounts. But technically speaking, if you've got 4 people or so on the signature card for the library for their library bank account, it might make sense to have them all bonded, but by statute, we just have to have the treasurer bonded, because ultimately it's their responsibility. And it is true, every once in a while you hear about somebody in some little community that's embezzled money. Sometimes it's from the library, and sometimes it's the city clerk. And it's like, how would you, in a budget that's $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year, how would you think that people wouldn't notice if you've taken some of that money? But I guess people do talk themselves into it. But yeah, it's just the treasurer that needs to be bonded. So you can make library fines by statute here. You might not have known that. So you can, the governing body of the municipality can pass ordinances imposing penalties as well if someone, for people who are like long time or serious miscreants in this way. So this is the statute that allows you to get the police involved if you've got somebody that's got $100 in fines or $200 in fines because they haven't returned something, or they've checked out 10 CDs and they haven't brought any of them back, or DVDs and they haven't brought any of them back. And you'll see newspaper articles every once in a while about somebody who was arrested because they had all these overdue books, and this statute is what allows them to do that. So I don't recommend that as a regular way of getting back books, but sometimes you just have to get after a couple of them. So the library board can allow people to display their collections or to place their books in the library. And I think a lot of our libraries do this with people's collections, and I should put the next slide on. So I have actually seen displays of salt shaker collections in libraries, kitchen utensils, quilts, trying to think of what some of the other ones, dolls, and they're owned by people. In fact, some libraries have cases that allow people from their community to display their collections of things there. Snow globes is another one. I'm trying to think of all the ones I've seen. But this allows them, but the library is not. So so anyone who puts something in there, the collection should be marked, but people can look at it, and the library is not required to charge any fees for the use or whatever of that. Usually when it's knickknacks, people don't want them touched, so they're usually in some kind of a case. But if they put a collection of books or documents in, they may be used as well. So let's move on. So library districts. So when a library district is established, it means that generally speaking, several townships have gone together. And sometimes, I don't know if it's ever the case where it's actual cities that have gone together, but most of the time it's townships. They have an election, and if the election if the ballot issue is passed, then the district is established, and the district is its own governing body. The county commissioners establish the district, and the library district, because they elect theirs, they levy a tax for their library, in their on their own. They're able to do that on their own. And they usually meet, I think this tells you, yeah, so their terms expire the first Tuesday in April rather than the end of April on the district ones. And so that generally means that they have to have their election for officers in March. And you have to publish your meeting just like the cities publish their budget hearings. The district has to publish their annual meeting and election in this case. Yeah, the first Tuesday of March.
It's interesting that they say at 2:00 p.m. That's very specific.
Or at 2:00 or at 7:30.
Oh, there you go. Or at 7. Okay.
Or at 7:30. So if you want more people to show up, you probably have it at 7:30, and that's when they elect their directors, and then the directors create the budget. And district libraries have all the same rules and regulations that that other public libraries have. And this is how a library district gets its name. And I was having this discussion with somebody the other day about how is it that they know what they can call themselves, because it's confusing if you have a district library in a county, because it sounds like it's the county library. So it's library district number, and I think, is it Lynn County that has like 3 or 4?
That would be 5. There are 5 Lynn County district libraries.
Has 5. Okay, so library district number 5 of the county of Lynn, state of Kansas. That's their legal name. So if there's only one library, so library district number 1, county of Lyon is one that we have in our system. People from Lyon County think that that's the county library. So sometimes it's a little confusing, but that is by statute how a library gets its name. They have all the same powers and duties of the municipal boards. Leavenworth has its own statute, but I don't think it's ever been implemented, has it? Isn't Leavenworth the one that they created this?
Right. Yeah, they're a city library, not a county library. So
right. Yeah. But the statute is still on the books.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Independence is one that has its own statute, and Johnson County has its own statute, and Potawatomi-Wabaunsee Regional Library has its own statute. So there are some very specific ones, and if you're in one of those libraries, you should learn those specific statutes. And we talked about bonding. Let me talk about the Kansas Open Meetings Act and the Kansas Open Records Act. And I put some things on the Moodle website about these, and it would be good for you to go through that. These are places where our boards really get into trouble, especially in small communities. So the Kansas Open Meetings Act, and there's if you want to copy down this, this is a tiny URL, a bit.ly, for the pamphlet that the Attorney General's office has created on the Open Records and Open Meetings Act. So the meetings must be open, and the notice of meetings must be provided to those requesting notice. So they all have to be conducted openly. And I think one of the things that probably we should make sure that applies is that they're all held in accessible places. So holding a meeting in an area that's not handicap accessible really doesn't count as an open meeting.
Carol, about the first line of that slide where it says if COMA applies, it's going to apply to all public library boards.
It does. It applies to all governmental agencies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently, the Attorney General has decided that it does not apply to the governor. And I'm not exactly sure how he got to that conclusion, but that's where it stands. And then executive session is another place where boards tend to get themselves into trouble. So there are 6 reasons that that a board can go into executive session, and the 6 reasons are listed here. Most often, the reason that they go into executive session is to discuss personnel matters, and when they go into their executive session, they have to state for the minutes why they're going, which one of these 6 reasons are they using to do this. And that's basically 1 and 2. The time that they're going to start the meeting and the time that the open meeting will resume. And so if they say we're going into executive session for 10 minutes to discuss personnel issues, then after 10 minutes they have to come back out. And if they haven't finished their discussion, then they have to put in the minutes that they are going to go into executive session for another 10 minutes or whatever they want to say to continue the discussion. And that's what gets put into the minutes. It's very important that they can discuss and they can reach a consensus in their executive session, but they cannot take binding action in the executive session. So they can't decide to do something in executive session and then come out and not tell anybody what they decided. That when they come out of executive session, they need to either say, they need to say what has been, they need to propose a motion about what was discussed and follow through by voting on that motion. Now, it is possible that that they may take no action. So, and that is especially true if they can't reach consensus in the executive session. They may say no action will be taken at this time, but that should also appear in the minutes. But none of the discussion in the executive session appears in the minutes. Is that clear as mud to everybody? Anna, did anybody have any questions about that? No? Okay.
Nope.
Because I'm not watching the chat. I've got too much on the screen already.
Understood.
Okay, so the Kansas Open Records Act has to do with, specifically with your library board minutes. Those are open records. And so those need to be made available at all times for people to come and look. And the same is true of your budget and things like that, your financial records. What doesn't have to be part of the Kansas Open Records Act is patrons' names or any identifying information about the patron or their circulation records, or if you want to call them the library circulation records or the borrower's circulation records. So you don't have to make any of that public. However, if you're not going to do that, your library should have a policy on file that says we're not making the library borrower's records available with, and we'll see an example of that a little bit later. The library does not need to retain a patron's charge records beyond their use for circulation. And so it's one of those things that I know the consultants have been suggesting for years, that if your library software will keep a history, people need to opt into that history rather than opt out. So don't hold on to people's circulation records unless they want to have access to that history themselves, and that's their prerogative to do that. But it's not ours. Certainly you wouldn't disclose any of that, even if they do keep those records. Now, the last thing in the Kansas Open Records Act, the last paragraph down there is one that I know we all kind of worry about, and that parents or legal guardians of children under 18 may obtain the current status of their child's circulation record or withdraw their authorization for the child's library card. So that's a really sore subject with a lot of us, but the way the open records are for the state of Kansas that pertain to children, this is one of the things that we have to deal with. And this is another one of those statutes that's not in 1212. It's, I can't even remember which number it is actually now, but it's about the any records having to do with a minor. So things that can be closed, the exception 23 is the library patron records, and Attorney General's opinion, which back in 95, says that open records access through electronic means require the same written policies as any other. So if your stuff is online, which almost everybody's is now, you still have to abide by exception 23.
Catherine Bandy has her hand up.
Oh,
Catherine?
that I can't see. Catherine, unmute yourself.
Catherine, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, sorry. I have a question. When we have our patrons fill out their initial form to get a library card, we ask them for a social security number so that if necessary, we can send it to Kansas set off. And then we don't enter that in the system anywhere, obviously. But we could, I guess one thing I'm asking is just to get rid of paperwork. Could we scan those into just a simple just into a database on the computer instead of keeping those paper copies?
I don't think that you're actually allowed to ask for social security number anymore, which is why they took them off our driver's licenses.
How would we be able to turn them into Kansas sit-off then? That's something that was being done before I started, and it's still on the form, I guess.
We actually have unique library management for collections, and they don't require a social security number. We don't allow social security numbers in Express. Right. So the information that we do have, the address and name and all that, is enough for the collection agency to find them and send them gently worded letters as needed. And so that works for us.
And I think one of the things you could do is to ask for a birth date, because you might have, I know many libraries have different rules for seniors than they do for adults under the age of 65. So to ask for a date of birth, and that's one of the ways that they can track people, is to be sure that they've got the right person, is they use their legal name and their date of birth. So I'd say that would.
We do have that on the form also. whatever reason, that's what our municipality does, our city clerk and the city does and they turn in people to Kansas Set Off for water bills and so forth, and they've always turned in the library stuff with it and collected. And
I think that the library having a file of people's social security numbers, even if it's only on paper, is problematic, because it is, in this day and age of identity theft, that is really a sensitive place for most people.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I was kind of worried about that myself, and wasn't sure how to bring that up with. I have had no experience with Kansas Set Off. Is that what you said? Yes.
So I can't, I think that would be a question that you might contact them and say, we're uncomfortable having record of people's social security numbers because it's difficult to secure those, and find out, if there are other ways that they can track that person.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So where are we here? Okay.
Sorry, Jessica just made the comment that Set Off does require social security numbers.
Yeah, I've never worked with them. So I guess that's the question then, if you turn it into the city and the city has collected those social security numbers, because the person has a water account or something like that, is that enough? Because then they would have it. I think that if in fact somebody got into a file cabinet or something, I'm assuming that you have them in a locked file cabinet somewhere.
Yes, we do.
Okay. It would be the city's prerogative to do that. It's a little bit more understandable to collect a social security number for something like a water bill, because that's kind of a credit account anyway that the city takes on that. It's a little bit different in standing than lending books to people.
Sure.
So
thanks.
So let's move on to some of the new legislation that's come out. This was back in 2015, but it finally has statute number. Last year at this time when we did this class, it did not have a statute number. So KSA 75, 5171 to 5188 is the Kansas Charitable Gaming Act of 2015. And basically that allows us to have raffles, or other kinds of gaming things, but for most libraries it's raffles. And we're able to, we fall under the educational. I think that the Attorney General's office would really have been happier if they had listed libraries by name in it, but that didn't happen. We had many long conversations with the Attorney General's office about this, but you are able to do that. It's a very long act, and basically, if you are expecting to make under $25,000 from your raffle, and I think that unless you're a very big city, that's probably 25,000 would be. You don't have to get any kind of a license from the state to do that. So it's for what most people have in raffles and for smaller libraries, this works fine. Okay. So no license required. So this bill.
I have a question about your raffles.
Okay.
I saw something across there about bingo. Does that mean that we could do charitable bingo, whatever, or no?
Bingo kind of falls under a slightly, there's more laws to bingo than there are to the raffles. But what it says again. They use the definitions out of the bingo law. So bingo has already had a set of laws, and I didn't put them in here because for the most part, most of our libraries just do raffles.
Okay, I just didn't know if they could do like fundraising bingo or something.
And I think that probably a lot of it would be under the same kind of thing here of under a certain amount wouldn't require a license. But there's something because bingo, I'm not exactly sure what the bingo laws cover. I know I read them last year, but I don't remember a lot about them.
Okay, thank you.
So Senate substitute for House Bill 2088 is the tax lid bill that passed the legislature this May. I can't remember. I've tried to push that out of my mind. But one of the sentences in the bill is this one, that taxes levied on behalf of another political or governmental subdivision shall not be considered in computing the aggregate limitation upon the property tax levies of the city or county if such city or county is not authorized or empowered to modify or reduce the amount of taxes levied for. So we fall back on that shall clause from 12-1220 that says that the municipality shall levy the budget presented by the library board. However, because this doesn't have more specific language, we're not entirely certain that that's what they were aiming at here. And so I think we're going to need some more clarification of this before we do our budgets for 2018. So this ordinance takes effect in January of 2017, January 1st, 2017. So it didn't affect our budgets this year, but for the coming year, the cities and counties and township, well, the cities and counties, not the townships, because they wrote it just as cities and counties, will be limited to raising their budget no more than the average of the last 5 years of the consumer price index increase. And so they'll give us a number at some point after the first of the year to tell us what can be raised. And then there's a number of exceptions that they wrote in there. But we're not sure whether the libraries are going to fall under that tax lid or not under that tax lid. And so stay tuned. And you never know when the legislature is in session what you're going to get. And then on to the city level or the township level. So where statutes are at the state level, ordinances and resolutions are what are passed by cities. And the ordinances fall under two categories, simple and charter. And simple is an ordinance that can be passed on 2 readings and is very easy for the city to change and repeal and add on to. Charter ordinances are things that exempt them from something that's happened from a statute that's been passed at the state level. And many communities use charter ordinances to remove the tax lid for libraries back in the 80s and early 90s before we got out from under the last tax lid. So here's a resolution that the board would pass. This one would be and I pulled the district one, but it could just be, you could also use this for a similar one for asking your municipality to create a employee benefit fund. And an employee benefit fund, I think Laura talked about, so I'm not going to explain that to you, but this is what a resolution would look like. The resolution passed by the city would then, or the resolution passed by the library board would then go to the city for an ordinance to be created. So here's one that what a simple ordinance would look like for creating an employee benefit fund for a city library. And these are all in the Kansas Public Library Handbook, and you can look at them online, since although I think some of you got paper copies. A charter ordinance is something that is a little more complex, and they're exempting the city. So for example, is a charter ordinance to exempt the city from where the library board members can come from. So it's exempting them from KSA 1222. And it explains how they've done it. Now, notice that they have to have a 2/3 majority of the council voting in favor of this. Once a charter ordinance is passed, it requires 2 publications, and there's a 60-day waiting period. I can really spell, can't I? In which opponents to the charter ordinance can file to bring this to election, and it requires 10% of the number of people who voted in the last election to get this back on a ballot. So generally speaking, ordinances like this don't engender that kind of controversy. Sometimes some of the tax there have been libraries that have, or city councils that have changed the mill level on their tax lids and things like that, and sometimes those can be pretty controversial. So some miscellaneous things. We talked a little bit about board quorum before. Unsolicited goods. How many of you, I don't know if I can see a show of hands, but maybe folks can tell me here, have ever gotten something in the mail that you didn't order?
We just had that happen to one of our libraries yesterday. So, yes.
So here's your statute. 5617 says, if you didn't order it, you don't have to pay for it. It's considered a gift. And you can give the folks who sent it to you, if you would like, you can give them the opportunity to have it back, or to just let you have it. This is
have it back at their own cost.
At their own cost, right? They can send you a thing to have UPS come pick it up, or however they want to do it. But you do not have to pay for it to go back, and you do not have to accept the gift and put it into your collection. I'm thinking here of all the L. Ron Hubbard books that over the years, all the libraries in the world have probably gotten copies of those books, and sometimes they want to keep them and sometimes they don't. We had a library that received framed artwork from that L. Ron Hubbard Foundation that were sort of Martian landscapes with little blue men in them. And they certainly didn't want to put them up in their library, and they didn't know what to do. And I said, well, why don't you put them on eBay? And I think they got like $600 for the 2 of them. So that was a nice benefit to the library. So you don't have to keep it. And this is the statute. And generally speaking, what I do is you write a letter back to the people and say, that you're not going to pay the bill, and cite this statute, and tell them that, and just be very firm about it. If they want it back, they'll have to pay for the postage. This is one of the contentious things that we see sometimes on CanLib. Periodically, we have these people who want to send us toner for our copiers, and they'll call you and they'll say, "What is the serial number of your copier?" And then totally unbeknownst to you, this will show up, and they'll say, "Oh, but you gave us the serial number of your copier, so we thought you wanted toner." And in fact, you don't want their toner. So the best thing if somebody calls you and asks for the serial number to your copier, not to give it to them. Because if you have a service contract, they have that serial number.
Looks like just Kim from Seckles is the only person who raised their hand as to having done this before. So just if you haven't seen it, you probably will.
So I think that now a lot of times you get books from people who have self-published things, and they send you stuff that you really don't want in your collection, and feel free to not pay for it. And if they don't want it back, just put it in the book sale. So, and then we do now have an Attorney General's opinion on who counts as a quorum. And so quorum is one more than half of the membership. So for a city library, that's counting the mayor, is 5, and a township library counting the trustee, the quorum is 4. You cannot conduct business if you don't have a quorum. You can talk about things. You can have an informational meeting, but you can't pass any motions.
And Carol, a question that came up at one of our libraries this spring was, but what if somebody has been sick for a long time, and so really we've been operating with just 6 members instead of 7, the quorum is still 5.
The quorum is still 5.
That person is your board member, even if they can't ever attend.
Right. And even if you have a vacancy, according to the Kansas Open Records or Open Meetings Act, even if you have a vacancy, that vacancy still counts in the quorum. So if you've had somebody who's resigned from your board, and you don't have 5 people, even if you're operating with a board that's down to 6, you still have to have a quorum of 5. So, and then down to the very local level are the bylaws, and the bylaws are the library statement of how it conducts business. And so it's very important, and you can that your bylaws are up to date and reflect how you actually do business. You should review them periodically and update them as needed. And the Public Library Handbook has some guidelines on what the bylaws should contain and a sample set. And the soon-to-be published Kansas Library Trustee Handbook will also contain those, so the trustees can have their very own version of it. And I believe that they are consistent. And then to the assignments. So there are 3 assignments, and 2 of them are not very arduous, but one can be kind of daunting. So we'll start with the bottom one first, since I just mentioned the bylaws. So sometime between now and the end of December, at one of your library board meetings, you and your board should review the bylaws and make sure they're up to date, and that they are in harmony with things like the Kansas Open Meetings Act, and that they recognize what a quorum is and things like that. So that's probably a pretty easy one. An even easier assignment is to write a resolution that you could either take to your board, and if you don't need a resolution for an employee benefit fund, or you don't need a resolution for changing where people are located who are on the board, you can just make one up. But I want you to have a chance to use the resolution language that's in the handbook and have one ready to pass. And that's due September 15th. That shouldn't take you very long. Now, the bigger one is this document search. And this is something that I decided that was very important for you all to do when we had a library whose authenticity as a legally established library was questioned a few years ago. And the city clerk said, well, you know, we never voted on you, and nobody could find the certificate of election. And so there is a list on the Moodle site of the documents that I would like you to lay your hands on and gather in a safe place. And if you can, find someone to scan them into electronic format, put on a couple of thumb drives, one for the director to keep, one maybe for the board president to keep, one for anybody else to keep. If you can find a Boy Scout who's in need of a Eagle project, they're supposed to do something lasting, and making documents accessible for a long period of time for the public library would probably fall under that, and it would actually be something that they'd like to do. But among the records that I'd like you to locate are all your board minutes. The board minutes are the legal history of your library. It has all the motions that were ever passed, and how you've done things, and how business has been conducted for however long your library's been established. And so for some of you, it's not going to be too hard because the library hasn't been around all that long. For others of you who are in libraries that may have been established in the 1800s, hopefully you can find those things. And again, if those documents can be scanned in to preserve them, that's very useful. But things like who has the deed to your building, and where's your insurance policy? That can be a very important question if you come in to open your library one morning and you discover that it's filled with smoke, and something has caught fire and damaged the library, which happened to Americus not too long ago.
So there are a couple of questions, Carol.
Okay.
The first one is from Jessica, asking if we can use the gap waiver that we did earlier this year as the resolution.
Sure, I'll accept that.
And Mike from Linwood asks, does the review have to be with the whole board, your bylaws review, or can it be done with an established committee?
Do they have a bylaws committee?
No. That's Mike. Do you have a bylaws committee? Yes, he says.
Okay, do it with the bylaws committee, and if there are any changes, take it to the full board.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, it's important. And a number of years ago, we had a policy workshop, and I'm hoping that we'll eventually be able to do this kind of a workshop again. And the person who conducted, June Garcia, who conducted the policy workshop, was talking about the bylaws. And I had a librarian go back to her library, and she got out the bylaws. And the last time, this was probably in 2005, but the last time that they had been updated was 1966. And so a few things had changed since then, like when they were meeting and where they were meeting. So it's important that the bylaws be reviewed every few years to make sure that they reflect current practice.
So Audrey says she reviewed the bylaws with her board this past spring. Does she need to do it again?
No. but that's what she needs to, on that assignment, she needs to tell me when the bylaws were reviewed.
Okay.
I'm glad to hear that libraries are being proactive. One of the things that happens a lot with policies and bylaws is that they get written and they get put in a notebook on the shelf, and then they don't get looked at again, and for years and years. And it's really important to kind of come up with a schedule for your board to review their important documents, like the bylaws, so that things don't get too horribly out of date. And also, if you do a piece at a time, it's less arduous than having to try and rewrite a whole policy manual or, do everything. Discovered that your bylaws are so out of date, everything has to be changed in them.
And a couple more questions. One is kind of off the topic. Does anyone know where the summer, or what time the summer reading meeting in Neodasha August 26th is being held? If you do, go ahead and put that in the chat box.
I bet Kim knows that.
Oh, yeah, she can put that there. 10 to 12 is what Kim said. So Jerry wants to know if you want our minutes as far back as she can find them, or just since they became a district library, which has been the last couple of years.
I think since the way the new library has been established would be fine.
Okay.
If somebody can go back and find those old ones so that you have a historical record of the rest of it, that would be great. But don't worry about that, just since you were established.
Okay, and then this actually comes up quite frequently. Do you want them to send you the copies of these documents, or just find them and let you know that they've been found?
I do not want the copies of them. What I would like them to do, I've changed the way that reads this year. I want a list of what you found and what you've done with it. So I want to know, like, we're in the process of scanning things, or we located this, or this is the deed to the building might be held in the city's safe deposit box at the bank. But what I would like you to do is, if possible with these documents, lay your hands and your eyes on them, because I think that this is important to know. If your insurance is held by the city, you want to have a look at that policy to make sure that the policy covers enough of your holdings. And sometimes the city will have a policy that covers the building because they own it, but it doesn't cover the contents. And you want to make sure that the library is covered for that. And also, if you have any artwork. I went to one of our libraries a few years ago, and I actually was there doing some training, and at the meeting afterwards, they had their insurance agent come in. And I said, these are really beautiful paintings. He had a Berger Sanzane and then one of his students' paintings there. And the agent was looking at him with me, and it dawned on him that there was no rider for this artwork. And so he went back and did that, because he didn't think about that when he was doing the library insurance, to figure out what they would need. And he wanted to, once he realized that they had some expensive artwork, you want to make sure that it's all covered.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are at 12:16, and Nichols, we have another meeting at 12:15.
Okay.
So,
I'll let you go then. Sorry it took so long.
That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.